Meanwhile, the scene shifts back to Jinwoo, who is deeply worried about the failure of the S-rank gate in Tokyo. The scene transitions to Jinho's father, who has just woken up from a long sleep. He asks his secretary how long he has been asleep. The secretary informs him that he has been asleep for exactly 23 hours and 46 minutes. The secretary further explains that he was planning to take him to the hospital if he did not wake up within 24 hours. The secretary then updates him on two recent developments. The first is that a patient has woken up from eternal slumber. Myung-han is shocked to hear this and learns that the person who woke up is Jinwoo's mother. He realizes that Jinwoo has the power to cure eternal slumber. Then he asks about the second development. The secretary informs him that he has a visitor. Jinhee, who is Jinho's older sister, arrives and asks how long he has known about his condition of eternal slumber. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to the S-rank gate in Tokyo, where chaos is unfolding. The giant beast grabs Yuri and devours him. The military begins attacking the beasts with tanks and helicopters. Sugimoto observes the situation and remarks that modern weapons are ineffective against magic beasts and urges his team to continue their assault. Kanai and Minoru engage the giant in battle. Kanai decides to target the giant's eye to prevent it from reading their movements. Sensing the threat, the giant counters with its weapon, forcing both Kanai and Minoru to evade the attack. Kanai observes the giant's movements and notes that despite its massive size, it is surprisingly fast. Reporters begin broadcasting the dungeon break from a safe distance outside Tokyo. They report that even from far away, the devastation in Tokyo is clearly visible. Jinwoo watches the broadcast on television and expresses his fear that if the situation continues, the gate could threaten all of Asia, just like the Jeju Island incident, and decides to take action. To his surprise, Gina stops him and pleads with him not to go. Jinwoo, confused by her reaction, asks what she means. Gina reveals that she knows he is planning to go to Tokyo. Seeing his sister upset, Jinwoo reassures her that he is not going to Tokyo. Jinwoo explains that he has been overworking himself and has decided to take a long break. He urges her not to worry. Jinwoo later goes to a park, still preoccupied with thoughts of the S-rank gate, and summons Beru. Beru addresses Jinwoo as Majesty, but quickly corrects himself and calls him King. Jinwoo warns Beru to focus on watching over Gina and questions if he has been watching period dramas again. Jinwoo asks how Gina has been feeling recently, and Beru responds that she has been sleeping most of the time. Jinwoo understands that Gina must still be traumatized by her recent experiences and reflects on how this is the second time she has stopped him from going somewhere, the first being 4 years ago when he went on his first raid. Jinwoo remains uncertain about what to do next. Suddenly, a car pulls up near him. Jinwoo is brought to meet Jinho's father. Jinwoo asks what business he has with him. He introduces himself as Yu Myung-han, the chairman of Yujin Construction, and slides a blank check toward Jinwoo. Mr. Yu clarifies that he is not an arrogant rich man who believes everything can be bought with money, especially when dealing with an S-rank hunter, and requests Jinwoo to see this as a gesture of sincerity. Jinwoo quickly understands that Jinho's father is asking him to keep the information he is about to share confidential, and that he is not here to recruit him into his guild. Jinwoo asks what he wants to buy from him. Mr. Yu reveals that he suffers from the same illness as Jinwoo's mother. Jinwoo is shocked by this revelation and immediately questions if Jinho knows about it. Mr. Yu explains that aside from his doctor, only his wife and secretary are aware of his condition, making a total of 3 people. Jinwoo remarks that this makes him the 4th person to know. Mr. Yu continues by explaining that he has been searching for a cure and discovered that the only person to recover from eternal slumber is Jinwoo's mother. He remarks that he does not believe it is a coincidence that it was Jinwoo's mother. Mr. Yu earnestly requests the truth from Jinwoo and promises that he will never forget his kindness. Jinwoo hesitates as he listens and begins to think about the weight of the situation and reflects on how 2 people are being forced to make life-changing decisions today. Meanwhile, the scene shifts back to the dungeon break in Tokyo, where reporters in a helicopter are broadcasting the destruction. One of the reporters announces that the beasts are destroying everything in their path and comments that it seems like they are trying to wipe out all traces of human existence. He adds that to make matters worse, the beasts are also eating humans. Another reporter tries to reassure him by stating that they do not need to worry as long as the beasts do not attack them first. He points out that the real problem is the massive giant standing at the entrance of the gate. He wonders if the giant is guarding the gate or waiting for someone. The cameraman looking through the camera guesses that the giant does not seem alive, as its movements are robotic and appear programmed. The reporter remarks that it would be better if it were a robot, since they might be able to shoot it down. He further explains that out of the 30 beasts that emerged from the gate, only 2 have been killed so far. The reporter then asks how long it has been since the dungeon break began. The cameraman replies that it has only been 2 days. The reporter wonders if they will be able to control the destruction before all of Japan is reduced to ruins. The scene shifts to the Ajin Guild office, where Jinwoo informs Jinho that he has decided to go to Japan. Jinho, recalling what he saw on the news, comments that this dungeon break is nothing like the Jeju Island raid. He remarks that he has never seen such massive magic beasts in his life. Jinwoo calmly states that if he succeeds in clearing the gate, the entire world will recognize their guild. Jinwoo notices Jinho hesitating for the first time and starts thinking about how Jinho usually has a lot of faith in him. This time, however, Jinho seems genuinely worried as the damage caused by the dungeon break is severe. Jinho then decides to accompany Jinwoo to Japan and adds that all of Jinwoo's recent raids have something in common. Jinwoo, confused, asks Jinho what he means. Jinho begins crying and explains that he is never present during any of those incidents. He admits that the only thing he can proudly show off is that he has been by Jinwoo's side. Jinho further confesses that he feels embarrassed for only being able to provide bragging rights. Jinwoo, seeing Jinho's emotional response, remarks that he never expected to hear such words from the son of a business tycoon. Jinho confidently declares that he wants to follow Jinwoo wherever he goes. Jinwoo points out that just a moment ago, Jinho was telling him not to go to Tokyo. Jinho responds that he trusts Jinwoo completely and knows that Jinwoo will protect him. Jinwoo starts laughing after hearing Jinho's response and explains that he does not plan to go to Japan at a time like this and requests Jinho to head home instead. Meanwhile, Jinwoo starts reflecting on the double dungeon and how he was unable to use shadows. He remarks that the architect is as strong as him, even though he is at level 100. Jinwoo realizes that there are still many beings stronger than him and acknowledges that it is a big world. Jinwoo decides that he needs to stop thinking that he is the only one who can handle every situation and reminds himself that he is not a hero figure. Jinwoo reaches his home and his mother gets excited to see him and asks if he has had dinner yet. Jinwoo asks if Gina has eaten, and his mother replies that Gina said she is not hungry. Jinwoo, still preoccupied with thoughts of the dungeon break, and decides he needs to make a decision. Jinwoo starts thinking about his response to Jinho's father and concludes that he cannot help him. Mr. Yu then questions how Jinwoo was able to cure his mother. Jinwoo hesitantly responds that if he knew the cure for eternal slumber, he would have profited from it rather than keeping it a secret. Mr. Yu calmly processes Jinwoo's words, and Jinwoo decides to leave. As Jinwoo starts leaving, he reflects on his decision not to be honest with Jinho's father. Jinwoo considers that while he might have been truthful, he does not know Mr. Yu well enough to trust him. He wonders if Mr. Yu might have planned something, or if he could be lying about his illness. Jinwoo decides that he should carefully manage the remaining holy water of life, as he has only a limited amount left. He remarks that while Mr. Yu's offer was tempting, it did not feel convincing enough. Jinwoo finally decides to help with the dungeon break in Tokyo and shares his decision with his mother. He begins thinking that while there are many people stronger than him, and as long as he is capable of leveling up, he needs to step onto the battlefield to grow more powerful. His mother, hearing his decision, responds that Jinwoo is just like his father. She recalls how his father would leave in the middle of a meal whenever he got an emergency call about a fire. She offers to help him pack after dinner. Jinwoo then goes to inform his sister about his decision. He asks if she is awake, and Gina replies that she is sleeping. Jinwoo asks for a moment to talk to her, but Gina rejects him, saying she needs to sleep. Despite this, Jinwoo decides to make her understand his decision and struggles to find the right way to start the conversation. Jinwoo begins by mentioning that he almost died recently, but quickly realizes that he made a poor start. He tries to clarify by explaining that he has had many near-death experiences, but during the double dungeon, he truly thought he was going to die. Jinwoo adds that he is grateful every time he returns home and promises that he will come back this time as well. Jinwoo gently pats Gina's head and thanks her. Hearing this, Gina starts crying. Jinwoo explains that he appreciates her for not asking him to stay all these years. Gina, still crying, responds that Jinwoo would not have listened to her anyway. Jinwoo promises her again that he will return and assures her that he will protect her no matter how far he is, and urges her not to worry. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to a press conference where Chairman Go and Jinwoo announce their decision to help Japan. All the reporters begin snapping pictures as the two shake hands. The scene then shifts to the airport in Japan, where Jinwoo and Jinho arrive. Everyone is confused as they see Jinho with all his baggage. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to Tokyo, where the military is attempting to evacuate all civilians to safer locations. One of the soldiers mentions that they can only carry 3 or 4 people, as there is not enough space in the truck for all the wounded patients. The doctor responds that there are over 10 patients who cannot even move properly. The military personnel angrily explains that this is not the time to worry about people who are going to die soon, and warns that the giants are headed their way and that if they stay here, they will all die. The doctor insists that he cannot leave the wounded patients behind, as he and his wife promised to stay with them until the very end. The soldier finally convinces himself to stay behind as well, and admits that he cannot run away, knowing there are still civilians left. He suggests taking cover, and suddenly they hear a large giant approaching. The giant looks at them, and the soldiers start firing at it. The giant tries to grab them, but the soldier immediately steps between the civilians and the beast. Suddenly, a shadow appears and attacks the giant beast, and it crashes to the ground. The soldier is shocked as he witnesses Jima's strength. Jinu warns everyone that the area is dangerous and realizes that they need to move the battle to another location as this place is too close to the hospital. Suddenly, a building starts collapsing, and Jinho uses his shield to protect a couple. He tells Jinu that he will stay behind and help evacuate the civilians. Jinu brings out his dagger while Jima begins attacking the rest of the giants with its tridents. Jinu dashes toward one of the giants and slices it in half. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to Maryland in America, where a group of hunters is discussing about Jinu. One of the hunters mentions that Jinu went to Japan. Another hunter responds that based on his sources, Jinu did not get an upgrade from Selner and speculates that he is going to die. He reflects that all of them got their powers upgraded thanks to Selner and comments that ordinary hunters have a limit to their powers. Another hunter explains that Jinu is a reawakened hunter. A third hunter mocks Jinu by saying that he might be overestimating his abilities. He adds that ants are nothing compared to beasts, and remarks that hunters with big egos always end up dying. He calls the situation ironic, as defeating the ants only seems to shorten Jinu's life. Andre overhears them betting on how long Jinu will survive in Japan. They bet yachts and houses on whether Jinu will survive for 1 or 2 days. Andre suddenly comments that he is not sure about Jinu dying in Tokyo, and confidently bets Scavenger Guild that Jinu will survive. Andre then suggests that all his hunters focus their attention on the S-rank gate that has spawned in their backyard. He wonders how many of them will survive to see another day after tomorrow's dungeon break. One of the hunters whispers that Thomas Andre has a knack for ruining the mood, while another whispers that they should just ignore his comments. Thomas Andre announces that Japan is now a real fun place for a good battle and declares that they are going to have their own party tomorrow. Meanwhile, the scene shifts back to Tokyo, where a reporter begins broadcasting Jinu's rampage. The reporter comments that it is hard to believe what he is witnessing, as all the ant shadows are taking down the giants. He adds that the giants are being eaten alive. Meanwhile, a kid starts running away from a giant, and Igris comes to her rescue and slashes the giant's hand. Iron leaps at the giant and delivers a powerful strike that breaks its skull and creates shockwaves. Igris shields the kid from the chaos, and as the kid starts watching Iron fight, Igris gently shakes his head to signal her not to look. He pats her head to comfort her. Jinu observes Iron's rampage and remarks that Iron is enjoying himself after leveling up. He praises Iron for doing an excellent job of handling the giants. Suddenly, a soldier approaches and thanks Jinu for his help. Jinu also expresses his gratitude to the soldier for rescuing the civilians and calls him a brave soldier. The soldier is surprised by Jinu's humility. Jinu then instructs Jinho to take the soldier to a safe place and finish clearing the area. Jinho begins evacuating the remaining people, while Jinu decides that it is time to get down to business. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to Matsumoto, who is shocked to hear that most of the giants have been cleared by Jinu alone. He recalls Goto Ryuji's words about Jinu and realizes that he was right. Matsumoto remembers his encounter with Jinu at the airport and reflects that he has seen many hunters in his life, but has never come across someone as powerful as Jinu. Matsumoto, sweating nervously, explains with a trembling voice that the giants are headed their way and requests Jinu to focus his defenses on Osaka. Matsumoto begins thinking to himself that no matter how strong Jinu is, he will not be able to defeat all the giants. He decides to negotiate with other countries while Jinu holds them off. To his surprise, Jinu announces that he cannot agree to focus on just one city. All the members are shocked to hear this. Matsumoto, stunned, questions Jinu's plan and is left speechless when Jinu declares that he intends to defend against all the giants by himself. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to Jinu, who uses his shadow extraction skill to turn all the giants into his shadows. As usual, Jinu struggles with naming them and decides to name them simply as numbers from 1 to 5. Veru proudly informs Jinu that he has killed another giant, and Jinu decides to name that giant as 6. Jinu notices Jinho and requests Jinho to go to bed, assuring him that he will join in a few minutes. Jinu remarks that everything is going well so far and observes that all his shadows, which are dispatched across Japan, are effectively handling the giants. With a surplus supply of mana, Jinu decides to employ the military strategy of attrition warfare. With this strategy, even if his shadows are destroyed, they can regenerate, while the exhausted giants will eventually be defeated. However, Jinu realizes there is another major problem. The S-rank dungeon break has triggered a wave of dungeon breaks across Japan, causing low-ranking beasts to overrun cities. This forces them to handle both evacuation and suppression efforts simultaneously. It has been 7 nights since the dungeon break began. Jinu slowly walks toward the S-rank gate and sees sees a massive giant guarding it, and the entire city is in ruins. Suddenly, Hanakawa appears, and Jinu asks if there are any other hunters in Tokyo. Hanakawa responds that there are no other hunters in Tokyo except for her. She explains that they cannot even assess the full extent of the damage caused by the giants. And Hanakawa further adds that the giants have spread to other regions and that a total of 16 S-rank hunters from major countries have been deployed, including Jinu, and all these hunters have been divided into 6 groups by guild. Hanakawa informs Jinu that there have already been 3 S-rank casualties, including Yuri from Russia and their own S-rank hunter from Phantom Guild, along with Lucas from Canada. Jinu predicts that if 3 S-rank hunters are already dead, a large number of lower-ranking hunters must have also perished. She further explains that a total of 31 giants have appeared, and that one of them is already crossing the ocean to China. Hanakawa thanks Jinu for his efforts in killing the giants, as they lack the manpower to handle the situation. She assures him that the remaining hunters, along with the help of his shadows, will take care of the other giants. Jinu understands that his task is to deal with the massive giant guarding the gate. As he looks at the destruction in the city, Jinu realizes that he has seen this place before. The city reminds him of the demon's castle with fire engulfing the buildings. Jinu speculates that the ruined city from the demon's castle might be a hint given to him by the system. He wonders what the architect is trying to tell him. Jinu recalls how the architect has not contacted him since being killed in the double dungeon, and speculates that the architect's physical body might have been real and is already dead. Jinu resolves to stop any further destruction and reflects that this is what he has been training for all this time. He remarks that the reason he always seeks strength is to avoid being overwhelmed by a powerful being, and this mindset has brought him to where he is now. Jinu informs Hanakawa that he wants to continue the raid. Hanakawa explains that other hunters are on their way to support him. Jinu, sensing their presence, calmly mentions that they have already arrived. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to Kane, who has just defeated a giant and calls it frustrating. Minoru attempts to lift her spirits and points out that they have already taken down all the giants and are still standing. Kane expresses her frustration and explains that she is upset about how the rest of the hunters left for Tokyo and leaves all the giants for them to handle as if they were assigned to clean up duty. Meanwhile, the scene shifts back to Jinu, and all his shadows begin marching toward him. Igris appears alongside Tusk and Iron, and they kneel before Jinu to show their respect. Hanakawa is stunned as she witnesses the sheer number of Jinu's shadows. Suddenly, Beru emerges from the shadows and lands behind Jinu. Both Hanakawa and Jinho are startled by Beru's sudden appearance. Jinu acknowledges his shadows for their excellent work and expresses his gratitude. He then instructs Jinho to escort Hanakawa to a safer location, and the two begin to leave. Jinu activates his shadow exchange skill and summons a giant. He commands all his shadows to charge forward, preparing for the next phase of the battle. Ru lets out a powerful roar as all the giant shadows, along with the rest of the shadows, charge toward the gate. Their march creates a deafening rumble that echoes throughout the area. The massive giant glares at the approaching shadows with an unpleasant expression. Jinu, noticing its reaction, is momentarily taken aback. The giant swings its massive arm and slashes through a large group of shadows in a single strike, creating shockwaves that ripple across the battlefield. The giant dashes forward, and Jinu watches as it wipes out hundreds of shadows with a single swing. He remarks that the beast is an overwhelmingly massive being, and the energy radiating from it makes him feel an almost instinctive urge to retreat. Meanwhile, Tusk launches an attack using flames, and Jinu, feeling uneasy, reflects on his experience and shares that there are only 2 ways to deal with such a feeling. He can either run away and forget about it, or completely eliminate the source of the problem. As Tusk continues his assault, one of the giant shadows attempts to ambush the massive giant from behind. To their surprise, the giant effortlessly blocks the flames and slices through the attacking shadow with ease. A colony of ant shadows swarms the giant and begins biting into its body. The giant tries to shake them off with powerful kicks. Beru, observing the situation, decides to attack, but Jinu stops him and instructs him to wait. Jinu wants to continue watching from the sidelines until he can identify the giant's weakness. The giant smashes through the ant shadows with brute force. A giant shadow attacks its hand, while Jima stabs its leg with a trident, but the giant continues to destroy the shadows with little effort. Jinu notices his own HP points dropping, and finally discovers that the giant is not defending itself because its entire body is shielded with mana, which acts as a protective armor. This explains the giant's confidence in battle. While witnessing one of the giant's attacks, Jinu identifies a single weakness. He summons Kaizel and prepares to launch a coordinated attack. The giant senses Baru's approach and dodges his attack. Igris uses lightning magic and attempts to slash the giant, but it evades the strike once again. Jinnu carefully observes and finally confirms the giant's weakness. The giant swings at Kaizul, but suddenly senses danger. Igris dashes forward and targets the giant's eyes. The giant raises its hand to block the attack, but Jinnu seizes the opportunity and appears out of nowhere to slash its eyes. Jinnu smiles as his plan works perfectly. The giant lets out a deafening scream while Baru tears into its body with his claws. The giant begins to falter under the relentless assault, and Jinnu decides it is time to finish the battle. Jinnu activates Commander's authority and brings out his S-rank daggers. He leads his shadows in a coordinated attack from all directions. Meanwhile, Jinho and Hanekawa watch the battle unfold. Hanekawa remarks that this fight is a clash between monsters, while Jinho feels a sense of pride in Jinnu's strength. Meanwhile, Jinnu continues targeting the giant's eyes with his daggers and uses his mutilation skill to deliver multiple slashes. Blood gushes from the giant's eyes as Jinnu relentlessly attacks. He commands Baru to deliver the final blow. Baru pierces through the giant's eyes, and Jinnu follows up with another series of strikes, using his mutilation skill, attacking again and again. The giant begins vomiting blood and collapses to the ground, marking its defeat. As the giant falls, Jinnu levels up but notices that the system does not notify him that the enemy is defeated. Jinho starts running toward Jinnu and praises him for the incredible fight and expresses his disbelief that he managed to take down the boss of the giants. Jinnu begins to wonder why the system has not declared the enemy defeated and realizes that the raid is not yet over. He observes the giant's corpse and notices the absence of black smoke, which prevents him from extracting its shadow. Suddenly, Jinnu hears movement from the giant's body and quickly stops Jinho from coming any closer. To their surprise, it is Baru emerging from the giant's corpse. Jinnu remarks that even though the giant is dead, it still has enough mana to mask Baru's presence. Out of nowhere, a powerful mana storm begins surging through the gate, sending shockwaves across the area. Baru moves to shield Jinnu from the waves. Jinnu suddenly remembers Jinho and looks around and finds that Igris is protecting him. Relieved, Jinnu feels glad that Jinho is safe. Jinnu realizes that the gate is attempting to absorb the giant's mana. He notices a cut on his face caused by the mana waves and remarks that this has never happened before. Jinnu instructs Jinho to stay where he is and decides to investigate the gate. He leaps forward and enters the gate. Upon entering, Jinnu is shocked by the sheer size of the space inside the gate. He remarks that this must be the reason the giants were able to pass through it. As he moves deeper, Jinnu hears a strange laughing sound echoing from within. Baru asks if Jinnu can hear it, and Jinnu confirms that he does. Jinnu wonders why someone is laughing, even though he has just broken into the gate, and decides to investigate the source of the sound. A figure continues laughing, realizing that the Shadow Monarch has arrived. The figure welcomes Jinnu, and Jinnu observes the individual bound in massive chains and wonders if this person is the boss of the gate. The chained individual requests Jinnu to free him and explains that he knows the plans of the rulers and wishes to pass this information to the other monarchs. Suddenly, the individual pauses and realizes that the person standing before him is not the Shadow Monarch and remarks that Jinnu is not the one he knows. Jinnu begins questioning the individual and asks if the rulers are responsible for his current state. The figure responds that the rulers are using him as a stepping stone to lay the groundwork for the real war that is destined to happen in the future. Jinnu is surprised to see that the system is not intervening this time, as it usually ensures that no information is passed on to him. Jinnu then inquires about the rulers, and the figure explains that they are longtime enemies of the monarchs. Hearing this, Jinnu wonders if the rulers are also his enemies and asks if the figure is one of the monarchs. The giant confirms that he is indeed a monarch and warns Jinnu that both the monarchs and the rulers are after him. He adds that Jinnu does not yet have the strength to fight all of them and advises him to gather more allies. The giant monarch offers to help Jinnu if he releases him from his chains. Jinnu, skeptical of the offer, questions if a beast would truly help humans. The giant monarch, determined to gain Jinnu's trust, begins chanting a magic spell. Suddenly, Jinnu receives a system notification stating that the king of the giants has cast the skill of the Pledge of Trust. The system explains that with this magic spell, neither the caster nor the acceptor will be able to lie to each other. The system asks if Jinnu will accept the pledge. Jinnu contemplates his decision and ultimately chooses to accept the Pledge of Trust. The system notifies him that the trust has been successfully initiated and that the contract can only be terminated if both parties mutually agree to it. The king of the giants then requests Jinnu to free him from his chains and promises to assist him. Jinnu responds that he will completely trust him, but before he can finish his sentence, the system prevents him from saying anything further. Jinnu realizes that he is now unable to lie. Jinnu decides to continue his questioning and asks why the king of the giants is able to speak freely without any restrictions, unlike other magic beasts. The king of the giants, confused, asks what Jinnu means by magic beast. Jinu explains that magic beasts are the monsters that emerge from the gates. The giant monarch understands what Jinu is referring to and clarifies that magic beasts are actually called denizens of chaos. The giant monarch then states that he has a question for Jinu and asks how Jinu is able to place the denizens of chaos on the same level as the monarch who rules them. The giant monarch further explains that the denizens of chaos who emerge from the gates are merely stragglers who have been separated from the other magic beasts. He reveals that these creatures have been captives of the ruler's army for an eternity, and over time they lost their sense of self. The king of the giants adds that as a king, he has managed to hold on to his sanity and has been waiting for an opportunity to escape from the rulers. Jinu, seeking clarification, asks about the ruler's army and whether they are the soldiers in silver armor with wings on their backs. The king of the giants confirms that those are indeed the ruler's soldiers. Jinu then asks why the rulers continue to send magic beasts to Earth. King of the Giants responds that the rulers are trying to turn Earth into a battlefield to fight against the monarchs once again. Jinu, confused by his answer, questions how sending magic beasts would turn Earth into a battlefield. The King of Giants explains that the rulers are doing this for a simple reason. They are imbuing the world with mana. While the magic beasts that emerge from the gates are seen as a curse, the mana coming out of the gates is viewed as a blessing. He adds that many people, not just hunters, share this belief. He further explains that mana crystals and essence stones are currently the greatest sources of energy in the world. However, the rulers are using them to lay the groundwork for war. The King of Giants declares that there is no better way to propagate power that does not exist. He reveals that the rulers decided to use their prisoners of war and that the density of mana is growing every day. He explains that the rulers have cultivated a field fertilized by the blood of magic beasts and are now ready to reap the fruits of their labor. He adds that the mana strengthens the world and that the rulers are planning to create a world that cannot be destroyed by the shock of war. Jinu, seeking clarification, questions the King of Giants further. The King of Giants explains that this war is a rematch between the rulers and the monarchs, and that the world will turn into a living hell because of it. He urges Jinu that there is no time to waste. He warns that if the rulers discover their meeting, both the rulers and the monarchs will not stand by and watch. He speculates that the messengers of the rulers might already be on the move. After hearing this, Jinu questions why both the monarchs and the rulers are after him. The King of Giants clarifies that the power Jinu possesses is not his own. He explains that the fact Jinu was given these powers means that the Shadow Monarch has betrayed the other monarchs, making Jinu the enemy of both the rulers and the monarchs. The King of Giants offers to help Jinu in the battle and requests Jinu to help him in return. Jinu boldly responds that if the King of Giants is going to help him, it would be better to make him one of his shadow soldiers. For a split second, Jinu transforms into a true Shadow Monarch. The King of Giants, terrified by what he sees, wonders what he just witnessed. He explains that both the rulers and the monarchs have astral bodies, so when they are destroyed, they cannot be turned into shadows. He clarifies that this is why he cannot become one of Jinu's shadows and pleads with Jinu again to break his chains. Jinu, understanding the situation, brings out his S-rank daggers, but still feels uneasy, suspecting that he might have overlooked something important. The King of Giants pleads once more for his freedom and assures Jinu that he will stand by his side. Jinu, wanting to confirm his loyalty, asks again if he will help him. The King of Giants responds that if Jinu helps him, he will return the favor, calling it a fair deal between two monarchs. Jinu finally breaks his chains. The King of Giants begins thinking about the moment when Jinu appeared as a true Shadow Monarch and wonders if he was hallucinating. Jinu then questions if the King of Giants will stand with humanity. To his surprise, the King of Giants remains silent, unable to lie because of the pledge of trust. The King of Giants tries harder to break free from the remaining chains. Jinu learns that as long as the Essence Stone remains on the back of the beast's neck, the King of Giants will continue to hear the voices of the rulers. Jinu asks if he is commanded to kill humans like the other beasts. The King of Giants realizes that Jinu has figured out his plan. Enraged, the King of Giants attempts to attack Jinu, but Jinu swiftly dodges and declares that their deal is off. Jinu states that he cannot allow the King of Giants to live because he is too dangerous and begins stabbing him. Jinu worries that the King of Giants might cause a calamity, but the King of Giants corrects him, stating that Jinu is the true calamity. Jinu continues stabbing and slashing the King of Giants, causing him to vomit blood. The King of Giants tries to retaliate, but Jinu evades his attacks and relentlessly continues his assault. The King of Giants curses Jinu, claiming that as the fight between humans and magic beasts continues, chaos will escalate and the world will transform further into a battlefield. He prays that all of his companions will be burned to ashes. Jinu confidently responds that it will not happen and finishes the King of Giants with a final slice. The system notifies Jinu Jinwoo that he has defeated one of the 9 monarchs and that he has earned a large amount of experience points, with the calculation taking some time. Jinwoo retrieves an essence stone from the King of Giants and feels disappointed that he cannot extract his shadow. He decides to take the essence stone as a prize. Jinwoo levels up by 8 levels, reaching level 122 just from defeating the monarch. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to Christopher Reed's house, who is one of the national-level hunters and an American. He receives 2 unexpected visitors, the Deputy Director of the Federal Bureau and Selner. Christopher remarks that he was not expecting anyone today. Connor explains that he has something very urgent to discuss and requests all the servants to leave. Christopher instructs his staff not to let anyone enter his room until both visitors have left. As they all sit down, Christopher questions the reason for their visit and wonders if it is about the S-rank gate that has spawned on the East Coast. He clarifies that he has no intention of going there. Selner responds that their visit is not related to the S-rank gate and explains that the matter is far more serious. Christopher asks if it is more serious than the S-rank gate. Selner reveals that Christopher might die in the near future. Christopher Reed expresses his gratitude to Selner for what she did for him, but firmly requests her not to joke about such matters. With an overwhelming aura surrounding him, he boldly questions if there is truly anyone capable of killing him. Connor starts sweating as he watches Christopher in this state. Selner calmly explains that she recently had a dream about him. Christopher tries to stop her from continuing, but Selner goes on to describe that in her dream, he was surrounded by men. Christopher becomes angry and remarks that if Selner came all the way just because of a silly dream, it is ridiculous. He mentions that he knows about Selner's former profession and speculates that her unique ability as an upgrader comes from her past as a psychic. He confidently declares that he is a national-level hunter and no one can kill him. Christopher then asks a hypothetical question about what he should do if her dream is true. He wonders who he could ask for help and if there is anyone strong enough to protect a national-level hunter. He concludes that there is nothing they can do about it. Selner, taken aback by Christopher's reaction, explains that she believes there might be someone who can help him. She suggests Sung Jinwoo as a hunter with the caliber to provide him with protection. Christopher starts sweating after hearing Jinwoo's name. Meanwhile, the scene shifts back to Jinwoo as he exits the gate after defeating the dungeon boss. He reflects on his decision to kill the King of Giants and remarks that it was the right call. Jinwoo recalls how powerful the King of Giants was even while shackled and worries about what could have happened if the King of Giants had not been restrained. He expresses relief that he saw through the king's plan. Thinking about his memories of the battle between the monarchs and the rulers, Jinwoo resolves to become even stronger. News of Jinwoo single-handedly clearing an S-rank gate quickly spreads across the world. Social media begins speculating that there is a new national-level hunter. Unlike the Jeju Island incident, where only Koreans guessed that Jinwoo was a national-level hunter, this time, the entire world believes that Jinwoo is as powerful as one. The giant that crossed the ocean is defeated by Liu Jigang. Meanwhile, Matsumoto turns himself in for his crooked schemes. The scene transitions to Maryland, where the U.S. government is hosting a party for a group of American hunters who completed an S-rank gate. Seeing the lavish party, one of the hunters remarks that since the gate was an S-rank, the government is spending a lot of money on the celebration. Another hunter agrees and mentions that the raid was not even that difficult. Thomas Andre approaches them and asks if they remember the bet they made the other day. He reminds them that they owe him a house and a yacht. One of the hunters nervously claims that he did not bet anything. Thomas Andre stares into his eyes and demands his tie instead. The hunter, startled and sweating, tries to explain that he did not bet anything. Thomas Andre then asks his secretary about the tie, and Laura comments that while the tie looks expensive, it would not go well with his Hawaiian shirt. Thomas Andre agrees and throws the tie away. Laura then informs him that there is a problem and explains that among the list of guilds invited to this year's international conference, the Ajin Guild from South Korea is included. Thomas Andre, hearing about the Ajin Guild, questions, and Laura explains that it is the guild founded by Sung Jinwoo. Thomas Andre becomes excited at the news that Jinwoo is coming to the States. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to Tokyo, where Jinwoo feels bad that he was unable to defeat the last giant that crossed the sea. However, he feels relieved knowing that he was able to improve his strength through the dungeon break. The military is in shock as they witness all of Jinwoo's shadows, and Jinho feels proud seeing their reactions to the shadows for the first time. Hanakawa approaches Jinho and informs him that he received a call. Jinho is shocked after speaking on the phone and informs Jinwoo that he needs to return to Korea. Jinwoo asks if something is wrong, and Jinho explains that he is not sure but was told to return home for an emergency. Hanakawa arranges a helicopter to take Jinho to the airport. As Jinho reflects on the call, he remarks that he has never heard his mother's voice shaking like that and wonders what could have happened. He decides not to overthink it and guesses it might not be something serious. Jinho arrives at the airport where the secretary picks him up and requests him to come along. The secretary advises Jinho to stay strong during this time and promises to explain the details on the way. The secretary reveals that Chairman Yu has fallen into eternal slumber. Jinho rushes to his father and starts calling out to him, but the secretary stops him and explains that hunters who cannot control their mana should not get too close. Jinho feels terrible hearing this and blames himself for being a useless son. The secretary hands him a scrapbook and explains that the chairman was working on it before he lost consciousness and that Jinho needs it now more than anyone else. Jinho opens the scrapbook and sees a collection of his achievements. He realizes that his father had the same habit of keeping a scrapbook of articles just like him. The secretary explains that the scrapbook contains every achievement his father recorded, including those of his older sister and older brother, as well as Jinho's recent accomplishments. Jinho starts crying as he looks through the scrapbook. The secretary further explains that the chairman always loved them deeply and had high expectations for him. After that, they decide to head home together. Suddenly, Jinho feels as though someone is watching him from behind and looks back but sees nothing. Jinho, observing his vice guild master crying, breaks his heart and decides to cure Chairman. He opens an elixir of life and uses it to cure Chairman Yu from eternal slumber. Meanwhile, Jinho's older sister Jinhee arrives at the hospital to check on her father. She notices someone leaving the hospital and wonders who the man is. To her surprise, her father wakes up from eternal slumber and Jinhee starts crying. The doctors are in disbelief as they witness a patient waking up from eternal slumber and worry that the media will have a field day once they learn about this. As Jinho looks back at the hospital, he wishes Jinho an advance happy birthday. After Jinho clears the S-rank gate and cures Jinho's father, he decides to return to Japan to wrap everything up. However, he realizes that he cannot go back to Japan for 2 more hours as he just used the Shadow Exchange skill to come to Korea. Jinho wonders how to spend his free time and suddenly remembers Cha-Hain, but decides instead to search for any unclaimed gate. Meanwhile, the scene transitions to Christopher Reed's house where he is sleeping, but suddenly senses something unusual and wakes up. Christopher notices that everything is unnaturally silent and realizes he cannot hear anything. To test it, he breaks a wine glass but still hears nothing. Deciding to investigate, he recalls Connor's advice to contact Chairman Go Gunhee if there is any issue, and that the chairman can help him reach out to Jinho. Out of nowhere, an individual appears, and Christopher demands to know who they are. Tarnak, the monarch of Iron Body, speaking in beast language, declares that Christopher will gain nothing by going easy on humans. Christopher, unable to understand his words, questions what he means. Tarnak commands him to remain silent, stating that he is not speaking to him but to his vessel. Christopher, angered by Tarnak's commanding tone, transforms into a one-eyed humanoid monster using spiritual manifestation and warns them that he will kill at least one of them. Both Rakan and Koresa are stunned to see a human using spiritual manifestation. Christopher then launches an attack on Tarnak, and the flames from his assault spread throughout the house. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to Tokyo, where Jinho is being escorted by the Japanese Hunters Association. Thousands of people gather to thank Jinho for his efforts with the S-rank gate. Over 100,000 people are present just to catch a glimpse of him, as it is his last day in Japan. Beru, observing the massive crowd, refers to them as subjects and suggests that Jinho should raise his hand to acknowledge their respect. Jinho, irritated, explains that Beru has misunderstood everything. Jinho then boards a plane, but Adam White from the Federal Bureau unexpectedly appears and sits next to him. Jinho questions the odds of Adam sitting beside him and sarcastically asks if Adam is going to claim it is a coincidence. Adam responds that even if he says it is a coincidence, he knows Jinho will not believe him. Jinho calls him by his name, surprising Adam, but in reality, it is Beru who reminds Jinho of his name. Beru urges Jinho to uphold his dignity as a king and remember people's names. Adam mentions that he has an urgent matter to discuss. Jinho assumes it is about the S-rank gate, but Adam clarifies that their hunters have already handled it. Adam then shows Jinho a video of a house engulfed in flames. Jinho asks about the footage, and Adam requests him to watch it until the end. Adam explains that the fire was started by Christopher Reed, one of the national-level hunters. He further reveals that 1,800 firefighters and 14 high-ranking mage hunters have tried to extinguish the fire. Jinho, watching the video, comments that the flames look intense and speculates that some conflict must have occurred. Adam agrees and reveals that Christopher Reed was found dead. He then shows Jinho a photo of the prime suspect. Jinho, shocked upon seeing the photo, uses his commander's touch to squeeze Adam, causing him to scream in pain. Jinho angrily demands to know if this is a joke and warns Adam that he will not make it out alive. Seeing Adam in distress, his bodyguard bodyguards attempt to intervene, but Adam stops them and begins explaining the situation. Adam reveals that the man in the photo emerged from an American dungeon and is not the same person Jinoo knows. Jinoo questions him further about the dungeon, and Adam explains that the mana waves emitted by the individual are similar to those of a magic beast. Adam also mentions that the man attacked one of their S-rank hunters and reminds Jinoo of the explosion that occurred a few months ago at the Federal Bureau headquarters. Jinoo asks if they are suggesting that his father is responsible for the incident. After thinking for a moment, Jinoo releases his commander's authority. Adam adds that Jinoo's father disappeared after the incident and that they have been trying to locate him ever since. Despite their efforts, there have been no traces of him, and it is as if he vanished into thin air. Adam explains that based on the evidence, Jinoo's father fits all the criteria to be the primary suspect. Jinoo then questions why Adam showed him the photo of his father. Adam reveals that during the upcoming International Guild Conference, where all major guilds from various countries gather, they plan to issue a red notice for his father. Adam further explains that they will capture the suspect as this incident has cost America a national-level hunter. He clarifies his reasoning for showing the photo of Jinoo's father and states that the Federal Bureau of Hunters wants to maintain a good relationship with Jinoo. He adds that this is why they are giving Jinoo a heads up regarding the search for his father, knowing that Jinoo would be shocked if he saw his father's face at the International Guild Conference. Jinoo remains in shock, unable to process the fact that his father, who went missing 10 years ago, has returned as a magic beast. Adam's bodyguards check on him, and Adam assures them that he is fine, but feels a bit weak. Adam begins to wonder if the skill Jinoo used earlier was telekinesis, and remarks that such a skill is typically only used by national-level hunters. He notes that even high-ranking mages can only move objects, and realizes that Jinoo might be the 6th national-level hunter. Meanwhile, it is explained that the International Guild Conference is an event where all the powerful guilds from each country gather to discuss the current trends and the future of the hunters industry. A few days later, the Federal Bureau of Hunters releases the list of guilds participating in the conference, and Ajin Guild is selected to represent South Korea. Despite Ajin Guild having only one top-rank hunter, its selection makes headlines not only in Korea but across the world. This decision signals that Sung Jinoo alone is powerful enough to rival most of the top guilds globally. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to a press meeting with Choi Jong-in. A reporter asks for his thoughts on Ajin Guild being selected for the International Guild Conference instead of Hunters Guild. Choi Jong-in confidently responds that the Federal Bureau of Hunters made the obvious choice by selecting Ajin Guild. The reporters appear confused as to why this choice is obvious, and Choi Jong-in explains that even though Ajin Guild has only one remarkable hunter, but that hunter is Sung Jinoo. He simplifies his reasoning by giving an example, stating that while other guilds have members who can be mobilized for battle, Sung Jinoo already has hundreds of guild members, referring to his shadows as his guild members. Choi Jong-in shares his experience with Jinoo during the Jeju Island raid, where he witnessed Jinoo's strength firsthand. He confidently states that Ajin Guild could give any guild in the world a run for their money. Choi Jong-in admits that his guild has always represented South Korea at the international conference, and he feels a bit disappointed that his trip to the States has been canceled. He mentions that he even renewed his passport for the trip. However, Choi Jong-in boldly announces that he feels more pride than disappointment, knowing that their country has a hunter who can handle any magic beast and who never hesitates to be on the front lines. He adds that he and his guild members survived thanks to Jinoo. Choi Jong-in concludes the press meeting by stating that he is absolutely proud of Jinoo being South Korea's representative. As Choi Jong-in begins to leave, his guild manager shares good news that they have received the permit for the gate that spawned in Suseo, which is a low-tier A-rank gate. Choi Jong-in praises him and asks if Ajin Guild applied for the permit. The manager responds that Guild has been silent for a while and did not apply. Choi Jong-in smiles and calls Jinoo a dungeon destroyer and remarks that all the major guilds are celebrating Jinoo's silence over the last 4 days. He adds that he is not like other guild masters, referring to Baek Yoonho, and criticizes the mindset of being happy about Jinoo's inactivity, calling it monkey mindset. He then asks if the association knows anything about Jinoo. Choi Jong-in suddenly recalls how Jinoo used to complete 3 or 4 gates before his reevaluation, and how after becoming an S-rank hunter, he started raiding in other major guilds' districts as well. He also remembers that Jinoo recently cleared an S-rank gate in Tokyo and wonders why he has been silent for the last 4 days. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to the Korean Hunters Association, where Manager Wu informs Chairman Go that China is requesting information on Sung Jinoo. Chairman Go asks if they are looking for personal information about Jinoo, and Manager Wu clarifies that China is only requesting public information, such as news articles about Jinoo's raids. Chairman Go wonders why China is suddenly showing interest in Jinhu and mentions that they have already made it clear that Jinhu will not be helping other countries for the time being. Manager Wu explains that the request is not from China itself, but from 7-star hunter Lu Zhigang. He adds that Lu Zhigang has taken a liking to Sung Jinhu after hearing about his S-rank raid in Japan. It is explained that China does not follow the international ranking system and instead uses a star-based ranking system where a 5-star ranking is equivalent to S rank. However, only one hunter, Lu Zhigang, has been given the honor of 7 stars. Manager Wu remarks that Lu Zhigang fought one of the giants that crossed the ocean to China and guesses that this might be the reason for his sudden interest in Jinhu, as Jinhu single-handedly killed the rest of the giants. Chairman Go finds this information intriguing and thinks that it is only natural for the strong to recognize the strong. He instructs Manager Wu to deny the request or send only basic information. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to the Scavenger Guild headquarters, where Laura reminds Thomas that Jinhu will be arriving tomorrow. Thomas calls Dongsu to his office to discuss about Jinhu. Thomas begins the conversation by stating that he will get straight to the point. As he slowly steps toward Dongsu, he warns him not to mess with Jinhu. Dongsu starts sweating as he watches Thomas in this state. Thomas remarks that he knows Dongsu is suspicious about what happened between his brother and Jinhu. Dongsu tries to respond, but Thomas suddenly transforms into an overwhelming presence and reminds him that he does not recall giving him permission to speak. Laura, observing from the sidelines, hopes that Dongsu will remain silent. She understands that only a few people can deliver such a threatening warning to higher-rank hunters, and silently praises Thomas for his strength. She also notes that Dongsu is similar to Thomas in his obsession with hunting down his targets. Thomas repeats his warning not to mess with Jinhu and suggests that Dongsu take a vacation at the guild's villa during the conference. Thomas questions if Dongsu will comply with his request. Dongsu remains silent for a moment, and Thomas asks him again. This time, Dongsu agrees and begins to leave. Laura remains skeptical that Dongsu will comply with the request, and Thomas agrees with her concerns. He instructs Laura to keep an eye on Dongsu until Jinhu leaves the country. Thomas remarks that Dongsu might prefer to be frustrated rather than dead. Meanwhile, the conference begins after a few days, and guilds from all over the world gather for the event. Lennart Nierman from Richer Guild, who represents Germany, also attends. Lennart wonders why there are so many reporters present, and his guild member explains that everyone is eager to meet Jinhu, since he has been a hot topic recently. Suddenly, they spot Jinhu in the crowd. Lennart suggests starting a conversation with him, as it would be in their best interest to get acquainted with such a powerful hunter, and begins heading toward Jinhu. However, Lennart abruptly stops and starts sweating, as he realizes that Jinhu does not summon shadows from another dimension, but brings them along with him. He speculates that with this army, Jinhu could start a war with the United States. Jinhu notices a foreigner staring at him, and Jinho explains that Jinhu has been all over the news recently, and guesses that the person might be a fan looking for an autograph. Jinho then questions why Manager Wu is in the States, and Manager Wu nervously replies in a low tone that he is here as Jinhu's bodyguard. Jinho starts laughing and sarcastically remarks that he does not understand what Manager Wu means by bodyguard, and asks him again. Manager Wu, with a pale expression, repeats that he is here as Jinhu's bodyguard. Suddenly, Jinhu points out that the Federal Bureau of Hunters is here to welcome them. Jinhu questions why Adam is present since he is only in charge of the Asia branch. Adam explains that he was in charge of the Asia branch until recently, but now he is also responsible for communication with Jinhu. Jinhu decides to go with Adam and requests Jinho to head to the hotel with Manager Wu. Adam requests Jinhu to follow him, and Jinhu questions if this is about his father. Adam starts sweating under Jinhu's gaze and assures him that the Federal Bureau's stance on Jinhu has already been made clear. Jinhu asks if the matter Adam is about to discuss is confidential, and Adam responds that some of the information he is about to share is highly sensitive, and they both begin heading out together. Adam explains that they are heading to the Federal Bureau of Hunters headquarters and reveals that they are in a state of emergency after Christopher Reed passed away. He further shares that they are looking for reinforcements, as a large part of their military relied on Christopher Reed. Adam mentions that Christopher's death has not been made public yet, but they will announce it soon and begin searching for a hunter who can take his place. Jinhu questions if he is one of their potential candidates for the role, and Adam nods in agreement. Adam states that the value of a runestone is directly proportional to the strength of the beast it came from. He shows Jinhu a photo of the runestone from the dragon Kamish and explains that the raid involving Kamish was the most catastrophic gate in the history of mankind. Adam Adam shares that everyone involved in the raid wanted to erase the memory of the dragon Kamish. He remarks that they are currently searching for the rightful owner of the runestone and that Jinu could obtain it if he accepts their offer. Jinu becomes intrigued by the Kamish corpse and requests Adam to show him the photo again. After seeing the photo, Jinu questions if the United States has been preserving the Kamish corpse all this time and requests Adam to take him there first. Adam hesitates, but Jinu presses the matter by stating that he has spared time for the Federal Bureau and they should return the favor. Adam reveals that he is unsure about the exact location of Kamish and that he is sharing this information only because he is authorized to do so. Adam assures Jinu that the director might approve the request since it is coming from Jinu and asks Jinu to wait while he gets further orders from the director. However, Jinu decides that he wants to go with Adam, and Adam, realizing he cannot argue anymore, agrees to Jinu's request. Director Brennan is disappointed to hear that Jinu is at the headquarters and questions if Jinu is interested in the runestone. Adam replies that Jinu does not seem interested in the runestone. Brennan realizes that Jinu appears to be focused only on the Kamish corpse and asks Adam to wait outside while he discusses the matter with Connor. Brennan questions if Connor knows anything about Jinu's true intentions, and Connor replies that he is also unsure, but firmly believes that Jinu is not here just for sightseeing. Connor explains that the runestone is extremely valuable as it provides hunters with more strength, which is essential for their survival. He adds that many high-ranking hunters are willing to pay enormous amounts of money to obtain the runestone, but Jinu is asking to see the corpse instead, which suggests that the corpse holds greater value to him. Connor shares that he always thought Jinu's ability to summon shadows was limited to the magic beasts he killed. Connor suddenly realizes that Jinu might have the ability to create soldiers from the corpses of beasts, even if they were killed by other hunters. He speculates that Jinu's true intention is to turn Kamish into one of his summoned beasts. Brennan angrily states that no individual should possess such overwhelming power and insists that they must stop Jinu. However, Connor warns that this decision could damage their relationship with Jinu. Understanding the situation, Brennan decides to take the lead personally and expresses his desire to see what Jinu is truly capable of. They all begin heading toward the corpse, and Jinu is in disbelief when he realizes that the Federal Bureau headquarters was built directly above the place where Kamish was defeated. Brennan starts opening the door, and Jinu senses a powerful mana inside. Jinu wonders how strong Kamish would become if it is turned into one of his summoned shadows, as it has been 8 years since its defeat. Jinu sees the enormous corpse of Kamish, and Brennan explains that this magic beast killed hundreds of elite hunters. He reveals that the corpse was preserved after it was defeated by 5 national-level hunters, and that all the power in the building is powered by Kamish's essence stone. Jinu decides to use shadow extraction and requests everyone to step back, and Brennan grants him permission to proceed. Jinu begins walking toward the corpse and uses shadow extraction, but to his surprise, it fails on first attempt. Jinu takes a deep breath and decides to try again, and this time he successfully extracts the shadow of Kamish. Kamish begins roaring, and all the lights in the room shatter into pieces. Kamish questions Jinu if he is the one who summoned him, and quickly realizes that Jinu is the Shadow Monarch. He addresses Jinu as the King of the Dead. Everyone stands in disbelief as they witness Kamish's shadow. Kamish notices the people around him and loses control. He decides to kill everyone in the room. He cracks the tempered glass effortlessly, and Brennan starts sweating as he watches Kamish break the glass, which was created using the mana of top-ranking hunters. Kamish finally shatters the glass completely and prepares to unleash his breath attack to destroy everything. They realize there is no escape from Kamish's breath, but to their astonishment, Jinu commands Kamish in beast language to stop. Jinu explains that the runestone containing its skill was removed long ago, and that it no longer has to obey the rulers. The Federal Bureau members are stunned as they hear Jinu speaking in beast language. Kamish expresses his feelings about being controlled by the Shadow Monarch and slowly bends his knees. He states that he once served the Dragon King, but now wishes to bow his head to Jinu. Jinu gently places his hand on Kamish and questions if it truly served the Dragon King. Kamish replies that it was once a servant of the Monarch of Destruction. Jinu senses the fiery rage within Kamish and understands that even shadows can possess a strong ego. He remarks that this dragon is more powerful than any beast that he has encountered before. Kamish begins wagging its tail slowly, leaving the Federal Bureau members in shock as they witness this behavior. Suddenly, Kamish concludes that it must leave and explains that the extraction occurred 8 years after its death, which is far too long. Jinu feels frustrated, realizing that even his powers are not enough to overcome the passage of 8 years. Kamish bids farewell to Jinu and expresses envy toward the other shadows who can serve their king for eternity. Kamish warns Jinu about 4 humans who have borrowed the powers of the rulers and advises him to beware of them. Kamish expresses expresses gratitude for meeting the new Shadow Monarch and returns to the world of nothingness. The system notifies Jinnu that the shadow extraction has failed because too much time has passed since Kamish's death. Jinnu apologizes to the director for the commotion and promises to cover all the repair costs and leaves the facility. Jinnu feels disappointed that he could not extract Kamish's shadow. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to Manager Wu, who questions Jinnu about why he has not been answering his calls. Jinnu responds that he was in a place with no signal. Manager Wu asks if Jinnu has met up with Jinho, as Jinho left to meet him after receiving a call. Jinnu explains that he does not know what Manager Wu is talking about. Adam overhears this and informs them that Jinho's name is not in the visitor log. Manager Wu reveals that someone from the Scavenger Guild picked Jinho up 2 hours ago. Adam remarks that although the Scavenger Guild has a good relationship with the Federal Bureau of Hunters, they are not authorized to act on their behalf. Adam decides to contact the Scavenger Guild. Jinnu begins to feel uneasy about the entire situation involving Jinho's disappearance. Laura hears about Jinho and realizes the real reason behind his disappearance. She questions if Jinnu knows about it. Adam responds that Jinnu has not been informed of the actual reason. Laura assures them that she will find out what happened to Jinho. Adam mentions that the Scavenger Guild will locate Jinho, but to his surprise, Jinnu also goes missing. Jinnu, realizing the urgency of finding, and blames himself for not assigning a shadow to guard Jinho after recently using one to save Jinho's father. Jinnu suddenly recalls his sister's similar experience and summons all his shadows and commands them to search for Jinho. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to Thomas, who realizes that Dongsu has gone after Jinho. Thomas orders his staff to locate Dongsu before Jinnu does. The scene then transitions to Dongsu, where Jinho is coughing up blood after enduring torture from Dongsu. Meanwhile, the scene shifts back to Jinnu, who begins searching for Jinho all over the city and wonders if the kidnappers have already left the area. Jinnu thinks to himself that Jinho could not have been taken down by a group of civilians, as he is a D-rank hunter. He reasons that if the kidnappers were just random civilians, Jinho would have noticed the attempt and resisted. Jinnu recalls Manager Wu mentioning that Jinho was taken by one of the hunters from the Scavenger Guild and starts suspecting that Dongsu might be behind the kidnapping. He considers the possibility that Dongsu has been waiting for him all this time to uncover the truth about what happened to his brother, as Jinnu and Jinho are the only survivors of that raid. Jinnu reflects on Manager Wu's warning and realizes that it might be coming true. He remarks that he does not regret his decision to kill Dongsu, as it was the only choice they had. Jinnu thinks that if anything happens to Jinho, it would be his fault. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to Thomas, who is informed by his staff that they still have not located Dongsu. Thomas begins analyzing Dongsu's plan and considers that Dongsu values his life and is fully aware of the difference in strength between himself and Jinnu. Thomas concludes that the fact Dongsu still went through with this means he is counting on Thomas stepping in to stop Jinnu. Thomas wonders if he has been too lenient with his guild members and calls Laura to gather information on Dongsu. Laura reports that she analyzed Dongsu's movements using surveillance data from the Federal Bureau over the past month and discovered that he visited unusual locations exactly 3 times. Thomas orders his men to investigate those locations and decides to head there himself. He questions Laura about how she managed to get the Federal Bureau to cooperate with their search. Laura explains that she warned them about the possibility of a clash between Jinnu and Thomas if they failed to locate Dongsu. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to the Federal Bureau, where all the members are working to gather information on Dongsu. Adam reports that all 100 hunters from the Scavenger Guild are on the move and that they even canceled their scheduled raid to head somewhere. Connor, hearing this, realizes that Thomas is giving the orders and warns that they need to handle the situation carefully. The scene transitions to an old factory where Jinho lies unconscious after enduring torture. One of the hunters expresses concern about Jinho's condition and notes the amount of blood he has lost. Dongsu dismisses the concern and states that he only wants to know the truth about his brother and has no intention of doing anything worse to Jinho. Dongsu explains that Thomas warned him not to mess with Jinnu, so he decided to extract the truth from Jinho, who is also a survivor of the raid. Dongsu remarks that he just wants to hear Jinho admit that Jinnu killed his brother, and that once he hears it, he will have no further business with Jinho. Dongsu attempts to wake Jinho by slapping him, but when he gets no response, he punches Jinho hard in the stomach, causing him to cough up blood. One of the hunters, seeing Jinho endure the pain, comments that being a tank has helped him survive, as a normal person would have died by now. Dong-su praises Jinho for holding out for so long, but warns that being stubborn will not help him in this situation. Dong-su, growing angrier, smashes Jinho's head against the wall and assures him that he does not plan to kill him. He explains that one of the hunters is a skilled healer who can heal Jinho quickly. Dong-su declares that he will not stop the torture until Jinho reveals the truth and warns that Jinho will have to endure this pain forever. He adds that no one will come to save him as the factory has been abandoned for 5 years, and even if Jinho screams, no one will hear him. Dong-su asks if Jinho is ready to cooperate. Jinho, speaking slowly and with a faint smile, tells Dong-su to piss off. Enraged, Dong-su slams Jinho's head again. One of the hunters, uncomfortable with the situation, states that he does not want to be involved in a murder and urges Dong-su to go easy on Jinho and requests him to call it a day. However, Dong-su, determined to uncover the truth, declares that he is just getting started. Suddenly, he senses someone approaching and notices a high orc shadow nearby. Dong-su, wondering if there is a dungeon break, decides to deal with it. The high orc begins trembling as it sees Dong-su. Dong-su moves to attack the high orc, but a flash of light appears and Jinho uses his shadow exchange skill. Meanwhile, the scene abruptly shifts to Jinho's apartment, where his mother wonders what Jinho is doing. Beru overhears this and thinks to himself that no one is a match for Jinho. They suddenly see Jinho on the news, and his mother becomes excited to see him and calls out to Gina. Beru also becomes excited to see his king on the screen. Suddenly, Beru senses that Jinho is furious and becomes concerned. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to the Knights Guild, where Jong-su warns everyone about the recent increase in accidents inside dungeons and urges them to stay sharp while exploring. Suddenly, Yuntae senses a shadow moving and informs Jong-su about it. Jong-su dismisses his concern and suggests that he might be drunk again. Yuntae nervously denies drinking and insists that his shadow was trembling in fear, and Jong-su suggests that he take a day off to rest. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to Thomas, who orders his driver to stop the car as he realizes that the fight between Jinho and Dong-su has already begun. Thomas breaks the car door and explains to his driver that he is heading toward the fight and orders the driver to follow him. Thomas starts running toward the fight at high speed, knocking over cars in his path. His staff watches in disbelief and realizes they will receive a lot of damage claims later and wish Thomas had just used the car instead of running. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to the fight, where Jinho arrives using shadow exchange and delivers a powerful punch to Dong-su. Jinho feels relieved as he realizes that Jinho has come to save him. The punch causes Dong-su to cough up blood and sends him crashing into the ground. Jinho becomes enraged as he sees Jinho's condition and transforms into an overwhelming presence. Jinho gives the elixir of life to Jinho, and Jinho drinks it, but the system notifies him that the elixir of life only works when the HP is above 10%. Jinho immediately turns to the other hunters and demands to know if there are any healers among them and commands them to heal Jinho. The hunters begin sweating as they look at Jinho and explain that they do not understand what he is saying because they do not speak Korean. Dong-su suddenly steps forward and translates by explaining that Jinho is asking them to heal Jinho. Dong-su mentions that this is his first time meeting Jinho, but Jinho ignores him and repeats his command for the foreigners to heal Jinho. One of the hunters explains that Jinho needs to convince his boss first, but before he can finish his sentence, Jinho smashes him to the ground and turns to the second hunter, questioning if he is a healer. The second hunter, visibly shaken, looks at Dong-su and asks why he did not mention that Jinho was involved in this matter. Jinho questions him again, asking if he can use healing magic. When the hunter says no, Jinho smashes him down as well. Dong-su begins walking slowly toward Jinho and questions if Jinho is the one who killed his brother. Suddenly, Jinho speaks from behind and warns Jinho to be careful of Dong-su. Jinho requests Jinho not to waste his energy by speaking. Dong-su repeats his question, asking if Jinho killed his brother. The two of them lock eyes, releasing an overwhelming aura. Jinho abruptly threatens Dong-su, telling him that he should ask his brother himself. Dong-su becomes irritated by this comment and attempts to attack Jinho, but Jinho swiftly dodges the attack and delivers a cold punch to Dong-su's stomach, sending him flying and crashing to the ground. Dong-su tries to stand up, but suddenly senses danger as he sees Jinho staring at him with a deathly glare. Dong-su attempts to attack Jinho again, but Jinho raises his hand and smashes him down. Jinho continues smashing Dong-su's head repeatedly into the ground. Thomas suddenly appears to intervene and asks Jinho to stop the fight. Thomas explains that he had warned Dong-su not to mess with Jinho and questions if Dong-su is still alive. Jinho boldly responds that Dong-su is barely alive for now. Thomas, seeing Jinho's quick response, requests that they talk through the issue and promises to forget that this incident ever happened. Jinho questions what the consequences would be if he refuses Thomas's request. Thomas firmly states that the next time it will not be a request but an order. Jinho throws Dong-su into the air and replies that he has decided to ignore Thomas's request. Dong-su realizes that he has achieved his goal and believes that Thomas now has no choice but to stop Jinho and ultimately kill him. Dongsu prays that Thomas will rip Jinwoo to pieces. Both Thomas and Jinwoo begin glaring at each other. Thomas questions if Jinwoo knows who he is. Jinwoo, unfazed, responds that it does not matter to him who Thomas is. Thomas understands that Jinwoo is still willing to fight him, even though he knows exactly who he is. The scene suddenly shifts to Thomas's childhood story. Thomas grows up in a poor immigrant family and spends his life surrounded by enemies. The universe grants him immense power as a gift to crush his enemies. Through an endless series of fights, Thomas proves himself to be a natural fighter. He uses all the power available in the world and seizes every opportunity to become a true king. Thomas destroys everyone in his path and brings all his enemies to their knees. He firmly believes that violence is his justice. Thomas's experiences have always taught him how to make people obey him. Meanwhile, the scene shifts back to the fight, where Thomas blames Jinwoo's ignorance for the conflict between them and begins attacking him. Scavenger Guild members arrive at the location to assist Thomas, but are left in shock as they witness the massive shockwaves produced by the fight between Thomas and Jinwoo. One of the shockwaves strikes them and destroys everything in its path. The guild members notice Thomas struggling and ask if he is all right. Thomas stops them from interfering, knowing they would only get in his way, and the members immediately step back. Jinwoo commands Igris and Kaizel to take Jinho to the nearest hospital. Thomas, meanwhile, receives a strength buff from his guild members, preparing himself for the fight. In response, Jinwoo summons his shadow army. Thomas becomes excited as he sees the countless shadows and declares that anything less would not be worth his time. He announces that he no longer cares about Dongsu's situation, and that his only goal now is to restore his pride as the strongest national level hunter by defeating Jinwoo. However, Thomas decides to give Jinwoo another chance and orders him to admit his mistakes and surrender so that he will spare his life. Jinwoo responds by showing the big finger to Thomas. Thomas becomes furious at Jinwoo's arrogance and warns him that he will regret his decision to not surrender. Thomas activates his reinforcement skill, which increases both his strength and defense. Jinwoo commands his shadows to attack, while Thomas signals his hunters to join the fight. The Shadow and the Scavenger Guild hunters begin clashing with each other. The tank hunters focus on their defense and create a large shield using mana, but the shadows charge at them and attempt to climb over the mana shield. Thomas starts breaking through the shadows and notices Tusk using shield magic. Thomas leaps toward Tusk and shatters the shield in seconds and breaks through Tusk's defense. Thomas realizes that the shadows are weaker compared to him and jumps to break through the factory walls and observes his hunters struggling against the shadows. Jinwoo uses his commander's touch to stomp the hunters down and suddenly notices Thomas charging toward him. Iron dashes at Thomas to stop him from attacking Jinwoo. Thomas delivers a powerful strike to Iron, sending him flying. The shadows begin searching for Iron, and Jinwoo uses the opportunity to attack Thomas from behind. Jinwoo lands a powerful punch and attempts to cut Thomas down using his S-rank daggers. To Jinwoo's shock, the daggers fail to cut Thomas. Thomas laughs at Jinwoo's futile attempt and retaliates with a powerful punch, sending Jinwoo flying. Thomas smirks and questions if national-level hunters are a joke to Jinwoo. He uses his capture skill, which is a type of telekinesis that pull objects toward him. Thomas boldly declares that Jinwoo should understand the difference in their strength. Jinwoo uses his commander's touch to counter the attack and tries to crush Thomas to the ground. Thomas, realizing that Jinwoo is trying to pin him down and attempts to hold his ground. Jinwoo's commander's touch freezes Thomas in place, while Thomas pulls Jinwoo toward him. Jinwoo attempts to attack Thomas, and Thomas, understanding Jinwoo's plan, becomes enraged. Jinwoo lands a hard punch to Thomas's face, causing him to cough blood. Thomas is in disbelief that he has bled. Jinwoo, not giving Thomas any chance to recover, attacks him again and declares that he will make Thomas regret underestimating him. Jinwoo unleashes a relentless barrage of attacks from all directions. Thomas finally admits that he will stop underestimating Jinwoo, and his reinforcement begins to fade. However, Thomas, unwilling to give up, activates his reinforcement skill again. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to Adam, and his driver requests an explanation of the situation. Adam responds that there is no time to explain every detail and warns that their lives will be at risk if the situation escalates further. The scene shifts back to the fight, where Jinwoo suddenly recalls Kamish's words about the 4 rulers' vessels among humans. Jinwoo speculates that the survivors of the Kamish raid might be the 4 vessels. Then Thomas transforms using spiritual body manifestation and begins walking slowly toward Jinwoo. Jinwoo realizes that Thomas might be one of the rulers' vessels, but still chooses to attack him. Thomas counters by attempting to knock Jinwoo down with a powerful strike. Jinoo senses the danger and leaps away just in time. Thomas's single strike shatters the entire floor into pieces. Thomas, not giving Jinoo any chance to recover, uses his capture skill again. One of the guild members, seeing Thomas use the capture skill, and warns everyone to retreat. The shadows, unaware of the danger, get caught in Thomas's telekinetic force. Jinoo, noticing the incredible power of the attack, and remarks that it feels like a black hole. Jinoo uses his commander's touch to hold his position, while Thomas unleashes his attack and destroys the entire factory. Jinoo manages to jump away from the attack. Thomas, realizing that his attack did not harm Jinoo, and boldly declares that he will not miss next time. Thomas leaps toward Jinoo, and before he can land his punch, Jinoo stops him with his leg and kicks him down to the ground. However, Thomas uses his capture skill again to pull Jinoo toward him. Jinoo, in response, uses his commander's touch, but this time pulls Thomas in to land a punch. Thomas realizes that Jinoo wants to go head-on and decides to use reinforcement to improve his defense and counterattacks. Their punches collide, and Thomas's reinforcement cracks open, which leaves Thomas shocked. Jinoo lands another punch, sending Thomas crashing down. Jinoo prepares to attack again, but Thomas gets back up and starts roaring. Jinoo dashes at him, and Thomas attempts to strike Jinoo, but Jinoo swiftly dodges the attack. Thomas's punch blasts the entire floor, and Jinoo grabs Thomas and shatters his face. Meanwhile, the Federal Bureau of Hunters members arrive at the scene and are stunned by the intense shockwaves coming from the fight. One of the members warns the others to be cautious, as the situation might be dangerous. Suddenly, they see someone crashing away, and both members are shocked to witness Thomas being beaten. One of the members asks Adam what they should do, and Adam explains that they need to stop the fight at any cost. The member hesitates and points out that there is no way to stop a fight between Jinoo and Thomas. They watch in disbelief as Jinoo relentlessly beats Thomas to a pulp with continuous attacks. They are amazed at how a mage-type hunter possesses such speed and strength. Jinoo continues his attacks, while Thomas starts wondering if he is going to lose the fight, but refuses to give up and attempts one last attack. Jinoo intercepts the attack and begins smashing Thomas's face repeatedly, breaking his spiritual body manifestation. Thomas realizes that he still has overwhelming strength and confidently boasts that he is the great Thomas Andre and that Jinoo's attacks are not enough to defeat him. Jinoo strikes him from behind and reminds him that he already said it does not matter who Thomas is. Jinoo continues his relentless assault. Adam starts shouting and pleading with Jinoo to stop the fight, but Jinoo remains unfazed and breaks Thomas's spiritual body completely. Thomas finally gives up and Jinoo stops attacking him. Adam stands in disbelief that Jinoo has defeated the great Thomas, the national level hunter. He wonders if there is any other hunter in the world who could inflict this much damage on Thomas, and worries about the chaos that will erupt once the news of Thomas's defeat spreads. Adam orders the healers to treat Thomas immediately. One of the healers explains that all of Thomas's bones are broken and he is bleeding heavily, and that it will require the combined effort of all the healers to save him. The healer remarks that Thomas was able to endure the fight because he is a national level hunter, and that any other hunter would have died 10 times over. The Federal Bureau members confirm that there are no actual casualties, and Adam feels relieved that the situation did not escalate further. One of the members calls out to Adam and shows him Dongsu's corpse. They realize that Dongsu is not breathing and has died. They also note that Sung Jinoo is nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to South Korea, where Jinoo switches with Beru to heal Jinho using Beru's healing skills. Jinoo speaks to one of his shadows and remarks that it has been a while since he returned to South Korea. Dongsu's shadow kneels before Jinoo and calls him king, requesting a name. The system identifies Dongsu's shadow as general rank. Jinoo names him Greed, reasoning that he died because of his greed, and asks if he likes the name. Greed thanks Jinoo for naming him, and Jinoo commands him to lower his head as punishment. The scene shifts to the next day at the International Guild Conference, where the entire building is packed with reporters snapping photos of Jinoo. Connor notices the reporters and realizes that they have already caught wind of the fight between Jinoo and Thomas. Connor informs Jinoo that they have gathered testimonies from other hunters about Dongsu and plan to disclose the findings of the investigation. Jinoo requests not to hear anything about Dongsu anymore and states that he came to the United States for one reason and will leave as soon as he is done. Connor provides Jinoo with earpieces for translation during the meeting. Jinoo steps inside the conference and all the hunters turn to look at him. Liu Jigang becomes intrigued as he sees Jinoo for the first time. Everyone begins whispering that Jinoo is the one who almost killed Thomas and also helped Japan with their S-rank gate. They are in disbelief that Jinoo single-handedly knocked out Thomas, who has been ruling over other hunters like a king. Jinoo sits down and the conference immediately begins. Dr. Belzer steps forward and announces that there have been sudden spikes in the number of gates recently. He adds that there is another unusual activity that needs to be discussed. The doctor explains that the concentration of mana in the atmosphere is becoming denser and suggests naming this phenomenon magosphere. He further explains that the magosphere is forming clusters in the skies over major countries in exactly 9 areas, and that it is even more concentrated in South Korea. Everyone starts whispering again upon hearing South Korea and turns to look at Jinu, realizing that he is also from South Korea. The doctor boldly states that there is no need to stare at Jinu, and that Jinu might not have the strength to control the magosphere. He adds that if Jinu did have such strength, he would already be beyond the ranks of hunters. Jinu begins reflecting on the doctor's words and wonders if the 9 places have something to do with the number of monarchs. The doctor concludes by saying that since the cause of this phenomenon is unknown, there is no way to deal with it at the moment, and warns that the world may face a profound change. Brennan interrupts and asks if the presentation is over, stating that he wants to take over from here. Brennan announces an important and heartbreaking piece of news, revealing that 2 weeks ago, national-level hunter Christopher Reed was murdered by unidentified individuals. The hunters begin whispering again, expressing disbelief that such a thing could happen. They speculate that only awakened individuals with the strength of national-level hunters could kill someone like Christopher, and wonder if Jinu might be responsible since he already defeated Thomas and might have enough strength to take down another national-level hunter. Brennan continues by stating that they will release the news of Christopher's death to the public tomorrow and urges everyone not to jump to conclusions. He reveals that they have a primary suspect for the case and shows a picture of Sung Il-won. Some hunters notice that the primary suspect bears a close resemblance to Jinu. Jinu becomes enraged upon hearing about his father, and an overwhelming aura surrounds him. The hunters, feeling Jinu's immense strength, begin sweating and decide not to look back, dismissing the resemblance by saying that all Asian people look similar. Jinu suddenly recalls there are 4 human vessels who have borrowed the powers of the rulers. Jinu reflects on why the rulers sent a beast that looks exactly like his father and wonders if this has something to do with Kamish's words. Meanwhile, Brennan explains that the suspect was first discovered in one of the American gates and has been identified as a beast capable of speaking the Korean language. He adds that this was the reason they requested Dong-soo to assist with the interrogation. However, to their shock, the suspect knocked out Dong-soo and escaped while destroying the entire headquarters in the process. Brennan elaborates that since the suspect is strong enough to defeat Dong-soo, they speculate that the suspect might have joined forces with other humanoid beasts to defeat Christopher Reed. He then shows the footage of the fight between Dong-soo and Sung Il-won. While watching the footage, Jinu notices that his father is saying something to Dong-soo. He realizes that his father is warning Dong-soo not to pursue him and begins to think that the suspect might truly be his father. To confirm his suspicion, Jinu asks Greed, the shadow of Dong-soo, and Greed confirms that the suspect is indeed his father. Brennan concludes the meeting by requesting the help of all guilds in locating the suspect. One of the hunters demands proof that the suspect is a beast. Brennan responds that the mana wavelength of the suspect is almost identical to that of a beast. Another hunter questions if the suspect was originally human and went missing inside a dungeon years ago. Brennan confirms that the suspect is in fact human. This raises a question in everyone's mind about why the Federal Bureau is not revealing the true identity of the suspect. Brennan explains that the suspect has a close connection with one of the hunters present at the conference and that they prefer to withhold the information. Liu Qigong boldly states that withholding the suspect's identity will not help with the search and directly asks what the suspect's relationship to Jinu is. Brennan, realizing he cannot avoid the question, informs everyone that the suspect has identified himself as Jinu's father. The room erupts into whispers upon hearing this revelation. Liu Qigong then boldly questions if it is true that Jinu's father is a beast and whether Jinu will hunt him down. Jinu calmly states that it is natural for hunters to kill beasts and that if his father is truly a beast, he will kill him himself. He further declares that if his father is not a beast but a human, he will hunt down any hunters who try to harm his father. Jinu vows to protect his family, even if it means turning the entire world of hunters against him. After the conference ends, Adam approaches Jinu and asks if he truly meant what he said. Jinu confirms it without hesitation. Adam expresses disbelief that Jinu could make such a bold statement in front of 500 top hunters from 120 countries. He remarks that there is only one other hunter who could get away with something like that. Jinu asks who that hunter is, and Adam reveals that the hunter is currently hospitalized. Jinu immediately realizes that Adam is referring to Thomas. Adam invites Jinu to join the banquet, but Jinu suddenly notices Liu Qigong walking toward him. Everyone around them feels the tension between the two hunters and watches in silence. Liu Qigong begins by stating that he defeated the giant that crossed the ocean, and Adam translates this to Jinu. Jinu, surprised, asks Adam if he can speak Chinese. Adam explains that as the person in charge of the Asia region, he is fluent in most Asian languages. Jinu requests Adam to continue interpreting. Liu Zhigang shares his experience with the giant, explaining that it was extremely difficult to defeat, especially because the water made the battle much harder. He adds that he has been curious to meet Jinnu ever since hearing about another hunter who defeated giants with ease. Liu Zhigang further remarks that he is glad Jinnu put Thomas in his place and that he was certain Thomas was at fault in the fight. Jinnu listens to his words and realizes that he might have misjudged Liu Zhigang and finds him to be an interesting person. The two shake hands, and Liu Zhigang concludes by saying that he truly hopes Jinnu's father is not the suspect in Christopher Reed's death case. Then Liu Zhigang leaves, and Connor requests a few minutes before bringing Selner into the room again. Jinnu is surprised to see Selner, as he thought she would never meet him again after their last encounter. Selner explains her visit by stating that she has been having the same dream every night, and that in her dream all the elite hunters are being hunted down. She further reveals that after a few days, the dream came true, referring to Christopher Reed. Connor explains that they warned Christopher beforehand, but he ignored their warning, and the result of his negligence was tragic. Selner expresses her fear that all the greatest hunters will be hunted down by powerful beings who will not stop at any cost. Jinnu questions if they are warning him to be careful of the danger, but Selner responds with a no and instead requests Jinnu to protect those hunters. Selner shares that she tried to remember the faces of the beings who killed the hunters, but was unsuccessful, and then attempted a different method by using her ability to reach their souls. She discovered limitless power within them and could not lock eyes with the being, forcing her to wake up from her dream. Selner begins trembling as she recalls her dream and mentions that the being spoke to her when their eyes met. Jinnu asks what the being said, and Selner shakily responds that the voice told her to go back and wait for the war patiently. Jinnu is shocked upon hearing this and remembers that the monarch of giants said the same thing about the war between rulers and monarchs. Jinnu begins to wonder which side the individuals killing the elite hunters belong to. He questions what all of this has to do with him, and Selner reveals that she saw the same power inside him. Jinnu guesses that Selner might have seen the shadow monarch within him and realizes that the individuals killing the elite hunters might be monarchs. Connor explains his reasoning for recruiting Jinnu for this task, stating that they need a hunter on the same power level as the enemy. He admits that he was initially skeptical about hiring Jinnu, but after witnessing his fight with Thomas, they concluded that Jinnu is the perfect choice for the mission. Connor offers Jinnu anything he wants in return, even the runestone from the Dragon Kamish. Connor further explains that without the elite hunters, the world would not be a safe place. Jinnu thinks for a moment and rejects their offer. Connor assumes that Jinnu is rejecting them because of a grudge against Thomas, but Jinnu clarifies that he is rejecting the offer because he is unsure who he is fighting against. Jinnu decides to leave, but suddenly stops remembering his words at the conference that he would kill any hunters who came after his father. He decides to help them and requests Adam to provide a list of all the elite hunters and arrange a meeting with each individual. Adam happily agrees to his request. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to an event hosted by the Federal Bureau of Hunters, which Jinnu attends with Jinho. Jinnu asks Jinho if he is holding up well after his recent injuries, and Jinho responds that he is feeling much better. Jinho begins crying as he realizes that Jinnu fought Thomas just for him. Other hunters observing Jinnu reflect that they cannot even sense his presence and realize that Jinnu is on a completely different level. They also notice that Jinnu fought Thomas for the man standing next to him. Suddenly, a man approaches them and introduces himself as the CEO of a company specializing in the disposal of magic beast remains. He expresses interest in purchasing the giant corpses in Tokyo. Jinnu explains that Jinho is in charge of business matters, and Jinho introduces himself as the vice guild master of the Ajin Guild. The two begin conversing, and Jinho mentions that he usually does not discuss business at events, but will gladly make an exception. Jinnu feels proud seeing how much Jinho has grown as a vice guild master. Suddenly, Adam arrives and provides Jinnu with a list of all the elite hunters, mentioning that it includes even the top 10 ranking hunters. Jinnu looks at the list and questions his rank among the hunters based on hunter points. Adam explains that if they consider his recent S-rank victory in Tokyo, Jinnu should be ranked 3rd or 4th. Jinnu sees the list and finds Thomas ranked 1st, Liu Zhigang 2nd, Christopher Reed 3rd, and Siddharth from India in 4th place. Jinnu feels frustrated trying to remember all the names and decides to assign a shadow to each hunter. He finds the event to be the perfect place to send out his shadows. Jinnu plans to use this approach to identify the monarchs, determine who is friend or foe, and ultimately figure out how to fight his opponents. Suddenly, Thomas appears and informs Jinnu that his arm was severely damaged and cannot be treated with healing magic due to the severe mana damage. Thomas explains that his recovery will take time and questions why Jinnu did not wipe out his entire guild, even though he was more than capable of doing so, and adds that none of his guild members died except Dongsu. Jinnu calmly responds that neither Thomas nor his guild members committed a crime severe enough to warrant their deaths. Hearing this, Thomas decides to head to Dongsu's funeral funeral and requests that Jinu allow Dongsu to have a proper funeral despite his crimes. Thomas concludes by suggesting they catch up for dinner once his arm is healed and asks Jinu to leave his number with his manager Laura. Laura simplifies Thomas's words by explaining that Thomas is thanking Jinu for sparing his guild members' lives and that Thomas is a bit shy. Laura requests Jinu's contact information and mentions that Thomas would like to thank him with a gift. Jinu rejects the gift, but Laura explains that Thomas does not like being indebted to anyone due to his highly competitive nature and requests Jinu's contact information again. Jinu thinks for a moment and says he might prefer a dagger as a gift. Adam then requests Jinu to continue their meeting with the hunters, but Jinu declines, stating that he could not find the sixth hunter. Adam is shocked and wonders how Jinu knows that one hunter is missing. Adam explains that they lost contact with Jonas, a Brazilian hunter, just a few days before the conference. Jinu realizes that the monarchs might have already captured Jonas and that only 7 elite hunters remain. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to Chairman Go Gunhee in his office. He suddenly feels something strange in his heart. Chairman Go realizes that his heart condition has worsened recently and wonders if he has reached his limit. He recalls his doctor mentioning that he might die within 6 months, but he has survived for over a year. Chairman Go receives a call from his wife, who expresses concern for him. He reassures her that there is nothing to worry about, but before he can finish the conversation, he senses a strong presence. He begins searching for the source and finds the Frost Monarch staring at him with a creepy smile.